Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Temporal Graph Reading Group. Today we are very glad to host Nikolaos Nakis, who will be presenting their recent work at AI Stats, Time to Cite, Modeling Citation Networks using the Dynamic Impacts Single Event Embedding Model. And Nikolaos Nakis is currently a postdoctoral researcher at École Polytechnique, part of the Polytechnique Institute of Paris. He holds a PhD from the Technical University of Denmark. Nikolaos received his Bachelor of Science in Physics from the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and then Masters in Mathematical Modeling and Computation from the Technical University of Denmark. His research focused on applying machine learning to complex systems and graph representation with a primary focus on social network analysis. So I will hand the mic to you, Nikolaos.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Andy, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present a recent paper. Again, the title is Time to Cite, where we're going to study the modeling of citation networks using the dynamic impact single event embedding model. And this is a joint work with Abdul Kadir Selikanat, Louis Boucherie, Sunil Liman, and Morten Moru from the Technical University of Denmark. Okay, so maybe I will start with a slide that maybe everybody has seen. So why do we bother? Why do we study graphs? Because graphs are everywhere. They can help us understand our social behavior through social graphs. They can help us understand complex systems such as the brain via brain networks. They can explain our mobility, the human mobility of our everyday lives through transportation graphs. And last but not least, we can analyze and help us understand academic graphs. And this is actually the part where we're going to focus today, where we're going to study and try to model the citation networks under the science of science. Okay, I'm going to start now with some pieces that we're going to use to combine and create our model. So one part of the study aims for the graph replacement learning. So essentially, graph replacement learning aims on finding some mapping functions f that take as an input a graph, and they project the nodes into a low-dimensional and usually Euclidean latent space, where each node is associated with an embedding vector. Such embedding vectors are considered to be sufficient to express and predict various structures that are present in complex networks. Importantly, in such a case, we need to be able to translate node similarity in the graph into close proximity in the latent space, meaning that similar nodes based on the connections in the graph should be positioned close to each other in the latent space. Yes, so the second part, maybe another piece is introduction of single event networks. So far in the literature, we have seen mostly static networks, where static networks are networks where links can occur once, and there is no temporal information available, meaning that we do not really care about the time that the link appears. We only care about the presence or absence of a link. The second case is our temporal networks, where links now have information in time. They're considered to be events. And in addition, the events between a diamond can occur multiple times along the timeline. So today we introduce a third case that maybe lies between static and temporal networks. We define them as single event networks, where in such a case we have links that can appear in temporal manner. So we have information about where a link or event appears, but if an event appears, it cannot be observed again. So when an edge happens, it stays there, and there is no way that this edge can appear twice or more times. We can think as an example of single event networks, citation graphs, where we know that when a paper is published, they can either cite another paper, and this citation cannot be removed, or it cannot be removed, or it cannot be observed multiple times. So citation networks are prominent examples of single event networks. In order to define a model for continuous time temporal networks under the single event case, we're going to use the homogeneous Poisson point process, and such a process is widely employed for modeling the number of events depending on the time they occur, and they are usually parameterized by an intensity or rate function representing the average event density. We can see the probability of sampling m events in the time interval given by capital T is given by this expression, and we can see that it relates very closely to the Poisson distribution, where instead of the Poisson rate, we have the integral of the intensity from 0 until t, where capital T denotes the total time interval. And also the intensity is non-negative. So now we're going to start working to define the single event Poisson point process. So we are going to define the conditional distribution M of t, where we know that since we have single events, the number of events can be either 0 or 1. So by using just the Bayes rule, we can write this conditional distribution as given by equation 1. So this is simply the Bayes rule application on this conditional distribution. By using equation 1, and by now considering the probability of an event happening, meaning that small m is equal to 1, we can further simplify this expression, yielding that the conditional distribution of having at least one event is given by equation 2, which is just the integration of the intensity rate from 0 until t, divided by the 1 plus the integral of the intensity until capital T. So now let's also define some random variables, capital Y, that shows the existence or not of a link. So capital Y takes the value of 0 or 1, and theta, capital theta, denotes the time of a corresponding link happening or else event, if it actually exists. So we can write the joint distribution or the likelihood of capital Y, capital theta, evaluate that time at 1, meaning that we have exactly one event at time t star. As follows, we have already calculated the probability of having one link, and which is given by the first part of equation 3, while also the probability of having an event happening exactly at time t star is given by this fraction. So overall, we can define the likelihood as the last part of equation 3. Yeah. So as a result, we can define the log likelihood on the whole network by assuming that every dyad of the graph follows the single event Poisson point process as with the expression given by equation 4. So if somebody has some experience with lattice space models, this actually resembles quite a lot the Bernoulli likelihood. And actually, if we, instead of considering a homogeneous Poisson process, if we consider homogeneous Poisson process, meaning that we have a constant rate, meaning that we consider that the probability of having an event is uniform throughout the timeline, this actually becomes exactly the static Bernoulli model. And using the reparameterization, lambda tilde is actually capital T, which is the capital T, which is actually the duration of the observation time times the rate of the Poisson distribution. So yeah, this is actually a very nice property that when we consider a uniform probability of observing an event, later is going to be observing a citation, we actually return back to the static case. So the second part is about the impact function. We want to actually, because the goal is in analyzing citation graphs, we want to define the impact of a paper. With impact, we describe the dynamics of incoming links, the dynamics of actual citations to the paper. So we used to quantify the node importance throughout the temporal horizon or the study time via two cases. First one, we are quantifying impact based on the aging, where we define an impact function as the PDF of over the dynamics of the incoming leaks. while we also define preference attachment plus aging. So the second formula for defining the impact function is just the product of the PDF times the CDF. In such a case, we see that the probability of having a high impact also refers to how many citations a paper or how many events a paper has had until time t. That's why the second formula captures both preferential attachment and aging, while in the case of only aging, we cannot capture such a case. In the main paper, we make use of the log normal distribution. This distribution has been widely adopted in the modeling of impact in citation graphs because it actually defines heavy tails, which are very welcome in case of the citation pattern, especially for papers that have persisting citation patterns. We need the actual heavy tails. We also notice that in the case where we have impact function as the product of the PDF times CDF, to calculate the capital lambda ij, we need to calculate the integral of the intensity. And this can be calculated quite trivially for the case of the product of the PDF times CDF by just applying the substitution rule that u is actually equal to CDF of I of t. So despite having a more complicated, a more complex impact function, we can still have an analytical integral. So this is also quite nice. So overall, now we can combine everything to define the dynamic impact single event embedding model, where we define the intensity rate between a dyad of nodes I and j for time ij, for tij, as the impact function. So the impact function usually is the PDF times the exponential of AI and exponential of beta j. These are just some biases that describe the tendency of nodes sending and receiving links, in this case citations, divided by the exponential of the latent distance. So Zi and Wj are actually our embeddings that we want to learn. And we're using the Euclidean distance, meaning that high density rate is achieved when we position these two nodes close to each other. And we will see why we're using a Euclidean distance in this case. To optimize such a model, to learn the parameters of such a model, we can use the log likelihood that we have calculated before, where now we just can use the intensity rate we defined previously in this formula. Overall, in the main paper, we define the impact function to be just the log normal PDF, but we also have considered the truncated normal. We have considered a mixture model. So the choice of the impact function is quite open. As long as the integral is for the capital lambda j is tractable, we can use any impact function we wish. We can have a recap now and have a procedure overview of the whole study. So in this case, as we said before, we have a single event where nodes can appear only once, and they also hold some temporal information. Based on the graph, we are defining an embedded space that we treat also the network as directed. So we define two pairs of nodes, Z, J, that are acting as the source of the source node embeddings, while WI are the target node embeddings. And we also define the node biases times the impact function. So if we take the impact function times the node bias, that is the tendency of a paper receiving citations, we can define the mass as the product of those two. And in this small example, if we consider this to be, for example, the impact function times the node bias for node I, for paper I, we can see that, for example, when a paper gets published in time t1, we have some small impact. As more and more citations come to the paper, the impact increases, reaches its maximum peak, defining the maximum mass, and then gradually fades away, meaning that the paper is died out and people start citing other papers that have taken over the role of such a paper. Finally, we're going to discuss a little bit about distance model. Why do we care and why do we use distance model? So we're going to have a small example based on a small social network. We have, let's say we have three friends, John, Maria, and John and Anna. So John is friends with Maria and John is friends also with Anna. by construction, to have a high rate of a connection, we need to position Maria close to John and also Anna close to John because they have a link. Naturally, representing homophily, meaning that similar or connected nodes are positioned close together in the latent space. The nice thing with the Euclidean distance is that is a metric, and then we can also bound the distance between Maria and Anna based on the triangular inequality, meaning that the distance between Maria and Anna cannot also be very high, very far. So we cannot position this node very far apart. And naturally, describing transitivity, so the Euclidean distance is able to naturally express also high order dependencies based on the triangular inequality. We're going to continue now with experiments. So we're going to consider a lot of prominent graph representation learning methods, both for static and continuous time networks, but we also considered multiple ablations of our model. So we're going to start with IFM, that stands for the impact function model, that we define the rate, the single Poisson point process, as the mass, which is the impact function times the node bias. Tendency of that's the tendency of receiving citations. We define the preferential attachment model, which is just the biases. So the higher the mass, the higher the probability of having a citation. We're going to combine those two, defining the temporal preferential attachment model, that is the impact function times the node biases. We're going to consider only the latent distance model standing for LDM, meaning that we have the product of the embeddings divided by the Euclidean distance. And lastly, we're going to define the dynamic impact single event embedding model, combining all of the previous together. So we see that the Dicey model is the only one that has both characterization of impact and also defining an embedding space, perfectly reconciling latent distance modeling with impact characterization. We're going to consider 4 networks. One is an artificial. We will see how we're going to create such a network. And we're going to consider also 3 domains: the domain of machine learning, physics, and social sciences. All of these networks have been created based on the OpenAlex citation database. And in this case, for the papers that act as targets, meaning that are nodes to be cited, we consider an impact function only for the nodes that have more than 10 citations, because we need to learn a PDF. So we need, for example, we need at least for 10 points, 10 citations in order to be able to successfully infer an impact function based on the citation distribution. That's why this network ends up being bipartite. For the artificial network, we have created a generative process based on citation graphs. I'm not going to go into much details here, but essentially this describes a successful generative process that takes into account also the time causality, meaning that papers cannot cite future papers, because the moment of when a paper is published, some papers have not been published, so they're not accessible in time. Yeah, so based on the generative process, we also create the artificial network. Firstly, we're going to start with some link prediction results. We have considered the different impact function models, the preferential attachment. We have considered node2vec, VERS, CDDNE, NetSMF, and the LDM. CDDNE is the only network, the only baseline that can capture continuous time networks, can analyze continuous time networks, and we also consider multiple ablations for our model. So for the Dicey, when we have the PA, meaning that we're using the impact function that uses the preferential attachment, which is the PDF times CDF, and also when we put the FI, means fixed impact, that means that we, to train the model, we first infer the impact function. So we start training the model based on the citation pattern, and then learn only the parameters of for example, the distribution for the impact function. And then we fix these parameters, and then we learn for the following iterations, we learn the rest of parameters, meaning that for the fixed impact, the impact function is not affected by the embedding space. Yeah. So in the case where we don't have a preferential attachment, we don't have the PA, meaning that we have the impact function based only on the on the PDF. So we see here that for most of the networks, our model outperforms all of the considered baselines, while it is mostly on par with the latent distance model that does not have any impact function. Only in the case of the artificial network and for low dimensions, we outperform the LDM. And this is not very surprising because we can actually, if we introduce additional dimensions, the LDM can actually start learning the time dependency or the time causality of the citation networks. Yeah, so we can now we can also visualize, because we have learned some impact functions. In this case, we're going to visualize the impact function just based on the PDF. We have considered the log normal and the truncated normal, while as you remember, the fixed impact defines a model ablation where the parameters of the distribution are fixed during the training of the embedding space. So in this case, we see that we have with the red lines, we define the truncated normal, and we see that actually follows very well the citation pattern. But when we switch to the log normal, especially for the case where we do not use the fixed impact, meaning that we let the distribution be affected by the embedding space, the model really wants to have almost a constant impact function, because it wants to really increase the tails of the distribution. So the papers, so for the log normal for the non-fixed impact, the log normal really wants to keep alive the papers along the whole time horizon. Some additional visualizations, again, from machine learning, we can see that, for example, like a very famous papers, such as the ImageNet, or going deeper with convolutions, initially they get a lot of citations, but after 1 year from the publication, they start dying out and people start citing something that has taken over their role in the machine learning section. So in this case, the citation patterns refers only to machine learning papers. So we do not really see the impact these papers have to the whole science. So for example, if ImageNet becomes very high in a different domain, we can still have some very active citation patterns. We also considered as an impact function a mixture model. So for the artificial networks citation patterns, which are quite more difficult than the real ones, we see that if we consider, for example, a mixture model of 3 truncated normal distribution, we can really capture the dynamics. And the question is like, for example, why use 3? Why not use more or less? So in this case, we can think that each one of the 3 distributions, the first one can capture, for example, the birth of the paper. The second distribution can capture the middle life of the paper, while the third distribution can capture the paper dying out. So yes, as we said, we have a lot of freedom in the impact functions. So we can use even mixture models or kernel density estimation and so on. Some very nice low-dimensional visualizations of the machine learning field over the years, where we have color-coded nodes based on the publication year, and we also give the magnitude of each node based on the paper mass, which is given by the impact function times the bias for receiving citations. And we see as years pass, the machine learning field becomes more and more impactful. More and more papers are defined over the latent space. And for example, in 2018, most of the citations were for papers that were published around the 1980s or 1990s. Where in the case of 2023, we have a lot of papers being published in early 2000s or around 2010. So that means that impact for a paper can take a lot of time to be observed. We also have the same visualizations for the social sciences, where we can see a similar effect that science and social sciences also, more and more papers are being published. Impact is also increasing as we increase the years of the study. And we also see that the most papers that are cited today have been published in the 1990s and early 2000s. And lastly, we can see the present day status of physics. So in this case, we're color coding the nodes based on the years passed from the publication. So we see the papers that are super impactful, with a green point in the middle, have been published maximum 10 years ago. We have a lot of papers that have been published 20 years ago, and so on. While we can also see cases where we have papers being active today that have been cited that have been published, even 90 years ago. So as a conclusion, we have proposed the DICE, a model combining traditional impact quantification with latent distance models. We have focused on single event networks, introducing the single event Poisson point process for the first time. We managed to define visualizations depicting the life cycle of papers, highlighting their emergence, impact duration, and eventual decline as science evolves over the years. And lastly, we have demonstrated how our model reconciles conventional impact modeling with latent distance embeddings. This was highlighted. The reconciliation was highlighted based on 3 layer networks covering 3 distinct fields of science. So some additional references about Poisson point processes, latent distance modeling, and paper impact characterization. There are some very interesting papers. And thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, so I really like the citation trend modeling plots. I think those are very interesting. I do have some questions, especially for link prediction. Have you done any experiments without doing the AUC, but with MR? So a bit more challenging because the AUC are usually very easy to get perfect performance for models in general, and it's highly dependent on which negative link you sample, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're correct. We have only considered AUC for the precision recall and the AUC ROC, but I would say precision recall does not count for true negatives, which is more challenging than the AUC ROC scores. But yeah, we haven't really studied additional metrics, but I think we should do that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. And your method for now just applies to citation networks. Do you have other examples of single event networks?
Yeah, we have also introduced single event networks, for example, some review networks where users are reviewing, for example, products. So in such a case, usually a user does not create multiple reviews. Right. So we can also consider this as a case of single events, but we're also looking for more applications in the future about single event networks.
Yes. Thanks for sharing the paper. The results are very interesting. Are there any questions from the audience? So feel free to type your question into the chat or just unmute yourself to ask any question.
Andy, this is Junaid. Can I ask a question about extending this to multi-events? So if the links keep happening, what would change in the model to make it work for the multi-event case?
Yeah, so in this case, we're not considering single event networks. So we can just switch from the single event point process to just the normal homogeneous Poisson point process. And there has been a lot of work in this case. I can share some papers. We also have some work using the single event Poisson point process to model continuous time networks. So in this case, this has already been extended to the case where we have events happening throughout the timeline, or just the case of temporal networks.
Thank you very much. I will email you and Abdul Qadir about something related.
Yeah, super nice. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. So thanks for the question. And if there's just no more question, then let's wrap up the talk for today. And let's thank the speaker, Nikolaos, again for presenting his very interesting work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.